Tonight on Debate Amongst Friends, Doc running solo. Gonna have a great show as the professor is absent this evening. Definitely have some interesting things to talk about, and I'm sure we're gonna get some great takes from the Professor John Gotti next week. But tonight it's gonna be unfiltered, gonna be uncut. No music, but the Doc is in the building as we had some interesting things happen. I'm so used to not being the host, but tonight I am the host of Debate Amongst Friends. So we're going to jump right into it. NFL had Black Monday. Of course, usually that's the day when the season's coming to an end and some coaches are getting fired. Of course, we've had some interesting departures as well as some interesting keepers. Just jumping right into some of the individuals who we kind of figured would get fired. Obviously, Chuck Pagano has been struggling in Indianapolis for a while. It doesn't help that Andrew Luck's been hurt. But even with the acquisition of Brissett, they still haven't done any better. Obviously, Frank Gore is at this point of his career starting to dwindle down, even though he's still playing at a high level. It might be time for them to inject a little youth into that running back position. Another name that's not really, surprising, John Fox being let go from Chicago. Um, they just drafted a quarterback. I thought they would have gave him one more year, but in this situation, they do go ahead and let him go. I think out of those two, I'm not really surprised there. I think, if anything, they both had 1 year too many. But that's just my opinion. Of course, I'm just a lowly Bucks fan who we extended our coach. So I think the next two kind of go on the maybe meter. Of course, that's Jim Caldwell from the Detroit Lions and Bruce Arians from the Arizona Cardinals. Bruce, of course, decided to retire. Ironically, he did turn 65 years old, so I didn't know if that had anything to do with it. He might have wanted to get out and spend some time with his family. A very, very emotional press conference in that situation, and it was just interesting to see it because you see people, they're breaking down, they're crying, but you just have that feeling like, hey, they might come back and they might just coach again, maybe just in a different situation. For Caldwell, it might be a little different. I think he's a pretty exceptional coach. I think the Lions have always had a pretty solid team. I thought he coached the Colts well as also. I think he just kind of gets the short end of the stick when it comes to injuries, people retiring, and just multiple things. He just can't get to that next level. And I think he'll definitely coach again in the NFL when the right opportunity presents itself. I just don't know if it'll be this year, maybe next year. Who knows? Maybe he's back into a new contender within the next 2 to 4 years. But right now, I could definitely see him going and being a coordinator somewhere that's struggling in that particular area of his expertise, which in this situation is defense, which their defense has always been good despite losing some of their key players like Ndamukong Suh, and I know they lost a heap of linebackers. He's been able to really put together a solid team in Detroit, and whoever gets that job, I think, is going to be pretty lucky. And the other surprise, but not surprise, of course, Jack Del Rio was let go in Oakland after one good year and then one poor year. Obviously, he struggled keeping Derek Carr on the field, and their offensive line has declined. Last year, they probably were one of the probably premier offensive lines. This year, not so well. And, of course, their acquisition of Marshawn Lynch didn't pay off as much as I'm sure they would have liked it to. I imagine that they would have probably thought that he would have been a much bigger threat. But right now, it just looks like they're going into a new direction, and that direction just so happens to be Tampa Bay's Ring of Honor awarded Jon Gruden. Of course, we all know Jon Gruden's still working with ESPN at the time, but with an expensive package which includes not only the money but part ownership of the Oakland Raiders to pry him away from ESPN. They threw the barn at him, and they may just well get him. Listening to some podcasts today and reading the news, the Raiders don't make this move if they don't believe that Jon Gruden is available. The question is, can Jon Gruden win at this particular time? It's been 10 years plus, since Gruden has coached in the NFL. He's been at ESPN. He's been on TV, Monday Night Football. Sure, I'm positive he's been studying. I'm positive he's been scouting. I'm positive that he can put a staff together. But are we sure that he can actually lead a team in this modern era of football? I think of people bringing older coaches back, similar like Joe Gibbs in Washington. Do the second stints work as good as the first? Those are the parts that I'm just not too sure of. And at this point, I'm just not buying. So that's definitely something to watch for within the next season. As Jack Del Rio is out, Jon Gruden may be in. Some other questionable decisions to keep coaches. Jason Garrett. I've talked to a few Cowboys, even my Lyft driver for New Year's Eve, and of course, Happy New Year's to everyone out there listening. But my Lyft driver said it clearly. He said, "I think it's time that Jerry, and I'm talking about you, Jerry Jones, it's time for him to stop hiring yes men and hire somebody who's going to challenge the status quo." And I completely agree with that. Shout out to that Lyft driver who's an avid Cowboy fan. I saw the hat, and I told him, I said, they need somebody who's going to tell Jerry Jones no. And to be honest, that's when they've been most successful. The Cowboys are successful when Jerry's out, the coach is in. However, with Jerry not having the leash on the team, the leash for the coach is very short. You've seen it in the past, where he's had great coaches. He just hasn't kept them because of the losses. However, Jason Garrett, because he's a yes man, he's got multiple years of mediocrity. Mediocre years, mediocre teams, mediocre stats. You got Dez Bryant out there, who I stated last week on the podcast as we were live here in Raleigh, which I am here live again in Raleigh. I felt as though Dez should give up his number 88, and I really feel like it's time. It's time. No, not Vader time, but it's time for the Cowboys to give up on Jason Garrett. Somebody posed a question on my Facebook wall. Destona said 1-31 as a record, or 1-30, whatever it is. It's 1 win in 2 seasons, but the coach is not fired. What do you make of that? Was his question. And of course, before I go into that, it's interesting to see, and it gives me, great pleasure to see a coach stand behind himself, of course, but the team and the direction. But Hugh Jackson believes that he's the man to turn this team around. He doesn't believe anybody else can do it. He believes that he's the man to turn it around. And that's admirable. It's really admirable. He had a nice season in Oakland, which of course landed him this job. But to believe that one man can turn over this team, And to think that it might have just been, hey, maybe it was just Sashi Brown, who it was all his fault. Let's get a new GM in here and let's see if Hugh Jackson can work. But we're going to bring Hugh back, even though he's only won one game instead of clearing house. That was very surprising to me. Because the NFL has a very, very short lifespan for head coaches who aren't successful. Um, you know, I, but one win. And that last game against the Steelers was rough. I mean, if you saw it, there was a big drop in the fourth quarter on fourth and maybe 2 or 3, and that summed up the entire 2 years of the Browns. Disappointment, heartbreak, and now they're moving into this upcoming offseason with 2 first-round picks in the top 10 and a pretty talented roster that just needs 1 or 2 players on the offense, 1 or 2 players on the defense, and they might turn it around, similar to how the Jaguars did. But we'll definitely keep an eye on that. Another interesting name, Todd Bowles. Um, you know, again, the Jets do need to have stability, and I don't think Todd Bowles has ever really been given an opportunity to succeed. And I say that because he hasn't had the quarterback. I mean, Ryan Fitzpatrick, now uh, Josh McCown. I mean, these guys are serviceable, sure, but are they winners? And I think Todd Bowles is going to fall in line with John Fox, meaning he might get 1 more year, and they'll probably draft a quarterback this year. But the question is, if he doesn't win, will they cut him loose? And I believe if he doesn't win next year, it's a high chance that they will. Um, so, I mean, of course, much love and respect for Todd Bowles, but it's either shape up or get shipped out. So the rest of the coaches that were on this list here, Pete Carroll, Vance Joseph, Bill O'Brien, even Jay Gruden, I was okay with them. I was a little shocked that Dirk Cutter was brought back because, Tampa has a weird way of firing guys after 2 years, and you never know. Anything could change on this list, people. I mean, this is the NFL. Anything can change. Any of these guys can be fired at any moment. Again, they could get hired. They can get fired. They can be moved. Jay could say, hey, I quit. I'm going to work with my brother, in Oakland. Bruce Arians could say, psych your mind. I'm going to stay, and I'm going to go and coach in Indianapolis, where I really wanted to be this whole time. Anything can happen. But the one man that I am so shocked at, out of all these people, and I'm looking at 15 faces. We went over 14 people just now. There's one man, that number 15th person, that me and even Stephen A. Smith agree on, and if the professor was here, he would say, that's your boy. I cannot believe that Marvin Lewis got an extension. I am shocked. I am appalled. It is ridiculous how a mediocre coach, somebody who he's been nowhere. I mean, I don't even think he's smelled anything close to a Lombardi trophy. And he's had prolific quarterbacks. He's had, even though I don't really like him, he's had Carson Palmer. Now he's got the Red Rocket, and I don't get it. I mean, he's had number 1 and number 2 receivers. He's had Chad Johnson. He's had, he's got AJ Green now. I mean, he had T.O. He had Hushman Zada. He had so many guys, so much talent, and it might be time for them to move on. I really think that they need to move on, but they gave him an extension. And yet here we were talking about the Broncos firing their head coach after 1 year where they also didn't have a quarterback. It's unbelievable. But I was really, really surprised that Marvin Lewis was able to to keep his job. But of course, there were multiple reports about, Pete Carroll retiring. Was the Redskins going to bring back Jay Gruden? Bill O'Brien and the GM weren't seeing eye to eye. It's just multiple things we have to, of course, keep our eye on. But the biggest shocker here, Hugh Jackson keeping his job, Marvin keeping his job. The Raiders, I get it. You want to make a big splash, you're about to move to Vegas. Who better to bring in than John Gruden? But Marvin, I just can't even forgive that. That's so unbelievable. Now, looking over on just moving on to another subject here, which I found to be very, very interesting. And this is on the hardwood. We're going to transition to the hardwood. Then we're going to go back to the gridiron. So we're going to do a little sandwich here. Do a little different. Usually we go football, basketball. We're going to go football, basketball, football. A little sandwich here. Kyrie Irving says that the Cavs explored dealing him before his trade request. Now, I know the Professor John Gotti, the king of RNG, the troll master, the data analyzing ninja, the star of the galaxy himself, would say this is probably media baiting. Unbelievable. I can't believe they're even talking about this. Who cares? All kinds of things like that, John Gotti would say. But the media seem to be caught with their pants down with this one. I felt like, hey, maybe there's some smoke to this. Maybe it's not just smoke. Maybe there's an actual flame to this. And I think John Gotti actually posted on his on Debate Amongst Friends Facebook. Of course, follow us at Debate Amongst Friends. You can find us on Facebook at Debate Amongst Friends. We have both a group and a fan page. You can follow us, of course, on Twitter at Debate Amongst Friends, our favorite. Of course, Instagram and YouTube, Twitch, and really you can find our merchandise. I think if you just Google Debate Amongst Friends at this point, you're liable to come up with something about Doc and Prof. We're that big of a deal. We're just trying to make it at this point. But with this particular story, I find it interesting because John Gotti again posted something shortly thereafter that kind of showed that LeBron is actually non-committed to the Cavs at this point. So now we have to beg and say, hey, are all those other articles that we spoke of, LeBron thinking about going to Houston, LeBron nearly but surely going to LA, LeBron, oh, where is he going next? Is he going to retire? We have these stories. But what's the answer is the question. And we have to wait. But the one thing that we know is that Kyrie Irving was traded from the Cavs. Why would you trade Kyrie Irving with a non-committed LeBron? And that's where it gets kind of weird. So I'm definitely looking forward to seeing how that transpires. But I find that to be unbelievable that the Cavs would trade Kyrie. Although they got a lot of pieces, they got a great amount of pieces. A great amount. I don't know if any of those combination of people equal the talent of Kyrie Irving. Maybe if it is, it's by the strand of a hair. And that hair wouldn't, of course, come anywhere from Isaiah Thomas's head, but somewhere along the length of LeBron James's hairline. I'm sure somewhere in there you'll find that gap of talent. But back to the other side of the bread here, back to the gridiron, we had some great college football games. One in which I was really enjoying until I ate a piece of cake on my goddaughter's birthday and I fell asleep midway through it. But I woke up to see the end where I watched Wisconsin do what Wisconsin does best, which is run the football. They beat Miami 34 for your turnover chain. And he said, 24, the head coach said, "What you got on my drink, homie?" Miami said, "My mama gave me that chain," and Wisconsin snatched it and went on with the Orange Bowl. I started watching this Michigan versus South Carolina game, but I actually grown tired of it and actually turned to the Citrus Bowl. But South Carolina did beat Michigan 26-19. I thought the Notre Dame versus LSU game was so much fun to watch, just as fun as the UCF versus Auburn. Actually, I kind of enjoy the University of Central Florida versus Auburn a lot more, but I felt that the defense being played in the Citrus Bowl, Notre Dame versus LSU, gave us that college football feel, and kind of led us up to the Rose Bowl and Sugar Bowl. So the Citrus Bowl, Notre Dame beat LSU 21-17, and the University of Central Florida went undefeated and beat Auburn 34-27. Unbelievable and undefeated team, which I believe we talked about earlier in our year or last year. And I said it. I thought that undefeated teams deserve a shot at the crown. I don't know if they have to extend the playoffs or what they need to do, but there's no way undefeated teams should not be in the running. And you have teams with one loss, two losses, you know, in the running. I find that to be disrespectful to me and this football business. But congratulations to Central Florida as they are now, a force to be reckoned with. I think that they're on their way up, and their head coach, is really has them believing, and you can't beat that. When you have a coach and you have a coach who's selling to his players that we can be just as good as any other team, and the players buy into it, you can't beat that. I hope to be even a quarter of a good a coach as some of these guys are. But definitely congratulations to Central Florida as they go on to complete an undefeated season. So, the Professor John Gotti and myself both gave our predictions last week. I chose Georgia over Oklahoma and Clemson. We both chose Clemson over Alabama. John Gotti chose to go with Baker Mayfield. He felt that Baker would make the necessary plays to beat that Georgia defense. I did not realize until he said it. John Gotti went 0-2. I repeat, the man who has more reads than a library went 0-2. And that should tell you how good these games were. That Georgia versus Oklahoma game, until the very end of overtime, kept us at the edge of our seat. And to be honest, I can't fault Baker Mayfield to an extent. I chose Georgia because I believed that their defense would come through. Clearly, these offenses and everything was working for everyone. Everybody did their thing. It was interesting to watch how Baker really destroyed them in the beginning of the game. The turning point to me, and this is where if Baker goes to the NFL, he needs to shake that, Phillip Rivers, and he needs to shake, that pompous, arrogant quarterback in him, that inner Johnny Manziel in him, and he needs to humble himself, as a Georgia defensive lineman pointed out. They lost the game to me, and this is just the doc. They lost the game when, after they scored maybe their third or fourth touchdown, Baker looked over and he did the throat slash. It was at that moment that I knew that Georgia was going to come back with a vengeance. And they did. I felt like Georgia almost gave the game away at the end. I felt like Oklahoma almost gave a game away at the end. But What a clutch play for that defensive lineman to block that field goal at the end, as John Gotti was leaving the apartment, to run an errand. I said, oh man, he missed such a great finish. What a great finish. And then for Georgia to just come back and just run it in, I'm sure Oklahoma was gassed at that time. They didn't want to give up that touchdown, but they were gassed. Final score, Georgia, 48. Excuse me, Georgia, 54-48. Baker Mayfield leaves defeated, and people yelling, "Be humble." Hold up, Baker. Be humble. That was our Rose Bowl game, and then we moved on to the Sugar Bowl, where, hey, Alabama has a whole bunch of injuries. Apparently, everybody came back. They've been in the medicals. They've been with the medical evaluators. They've been with the staff this whole break, and they got some players back. I expected Clemson to come out firing. I didn't expect them to come out so flat. I expected them to come out aggressive. Both defenses came out aggressive. It was 3-0 for the majority of the first half. And then all of a sudden you look and Alabama scores. It's 10. Alabama scores again. It's 17. Clemson kicks 2 field goals. And you're sitting there like, what in the world is going on? And then you start to see the hits start piling on, the sacks, the interceptions, the fumbles, everything's coming. So, we said, hey, I don't think Clemson's moving this ball. They ain't doing anything. People are getting smacked around. We're going to turn this off and come back to it. The score stayed 24-6. And it was at that moment John Gotti knew that he had gone 0-2, which we talk about because for those who don't know, of course, 0-2 is a tournament term for most notable for me at least, Evolution, the video game conference that we went out to in Vegas in July. You go 0-2, hey, you're out. But this guy right here, Doc Ocean, Dr. Wednesday Night himself, I went 1-1. I'm pretty proud of myself, even though I really felt Clemson should have won. I would have loved to have seen Clemson versus Georgia. I really believe that Georgia versus Alabama will be just as good. It'll be just as good. Predictions. John Gotti has submitted his predictions. He says, hey, we tried the young guys. Maybe we have to go with a more traditional team, an older team, a more experienced team, a team that has a lot to gain and nothing to lose, and that is the Alabama Crimson. Roll dang Tide over Georgia. And I'm lost. I really don't know. I know that Alabama doesn't want to go down again. But there's something about this Georgia team. If it wasn't for Jake Fromm, I don't know. I feel like Georgia would be so much better, even though he played a very efficient game. And I really don't want to go against Alabama 2 times because I feel like that's going to be the end of me. But I do believe in that Georgia Bulldogs defense. But can they hold up after going against that crazy Baker Mayfield? What a crazy game that was. And we know that Alabama has a stable of linemen. I wish I could table this for an hour and just think about it. But if I had to pick a team, I think I would have to go Alabama if I was on the spot. But just thinking about it, I'm gonna go Georgia. I'm gonna choose Georgia to beat Alabama. It's not gonna be a pretty game. I think it's gonna be a great defensive game. I think if Georgia was to watch the tape on Alabama, they would realize that they're beatable. I love Jalen Hurts. I love everything that Alabama represents. I love Georgia. I love Wisconsin. I love Alabama because they run the football. And I believe that's what football is about, running the ball. This whole passing attack is cool, but running the football is where it is. I'm going to go with Georgia, and I'm going to stick to it. Mark it down. Doc picked Georgia. John Gotti, the king of RNG, the troll master, the data analyzing ninja, the star of the galaxy, the Jag himself, the guy who has more reads than a library, picked Alabama. And we're sticking to it. But again, I definitely want to thank everyone for tuning in tonight. I'm going to do a quick show. 30 minutes is just me talking. So, I'm surprised I was able to go 30 minutes without somebody screaming in my ear. Chris messing up my audio. The Duke somewhere duking it out. I'm sure Jay Rich is somewhere marking out. And somewhere October is stuck between September and December. But the doc is here. No music tonight. We'll definitely be returning to our normally scheduled programming next week. But for the final thought, of course, it stinks because that he was a good coach. But things happen, and Arizona Wildcats fire Rich Rodriguez, and it also came out that he's involved in a scandal, sexual misconduct scandal. So it's interesting that the news came out around the same time as the firing, but it's definitely something to monitor, as this is another scandal for college sports in general. And it's another scandal for sexual misconduct, sexual harassment. And this is a country, one of the strongest countries, and we're having such a problem right now. And of course, we don't know if this is a world spread thing, but it's interesting to see all of these sexual misconducts, sexual harassment, assault. It's really, really becoming to be a little ridiculous. And I do hope that justice is served to everybody that's involved in these type of things, if they did it. And that's another thing. If you did it, I want you to pay for it. But that's all I have for you tonight. I am Dr. Wednesday Night on behalf of Debate Amongst Friends, Professor John Gotti, Jay Rich, Senior October, as well as the Duke. We definitely want to wish you a happy new year. We have some great programming for you this year. We're going to try to do some new things. We're going to try to be innovative. We're going to be creative. But please, if you have any things that you want us to talk about, any things that you want us to, touch on or debate over, you can always reach out to us on our social media platforms. Again, at Debate Amongst Friends, Facebook. We have a group and a fan page. Twitter, at Debate Amongst Friends. Instagram, Twitch, and YouTube. You can always like, subscribe, and leave a comment of what you want us to talk about. If you have any music that you really want us to listen to and play at the end of one of our shows, or if you want to say anything or send us an email, debateamongstfriends@gmail.com. Once again, I am Dr. Wednesday Night, Doc Ocean himself. And again, I wish you a happy New Year's, and I bid you adieu. Taste the ocean.